Thank you for pressing start on episode 51 of Underplayed, KZUM's indie video game podcast. Today we have 2 secret games, followed by a review of our featured game, SOMA. Here on Underplayed, we review indie games of all kinds, the games with small budgets but big hearts, the lesser-known experiences with imaginative ideas. I'm Bo Poe, and joining me is my best friend, playing games that he recommends. He's the biggest fan of Mega Man, flipping phones after smartphones began. I'm talking about the late-night streaming, secret game scheming. Everyone say hola to DiscoCola. What is going on?
Man, I tried to think of a cool reference to our featured game today, but what's the point? Eventually, my references will become redundant copies of other games that have similar themes. So what's the point? Won't you say something, Bopo? I don't want to think.
I'm doing just fine, my brain-damaged tracer fluid finder. Those are references to our featured game, SOMA. And this is a very special game this season because we played it with other people as part of an annual Halloween event that we both participate in, one that I host at my house, and we have people over to play a scary game. And this year we played SOMA with our friends, and so that will be an interesting twist on our usual review. We've got some recorded sound bites from the day to play during that review, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, we will have 2 secret games to review. And DiscoCola, speaking of secret games and featured games, we like to go back and talk about some of the past games we've covered from time to time. And you've had a chance to really dig in deep when you're not playing games for Season 5. You've been going back to games like Solar Ash.
Yeah.
What's that been like?
So it's been hard, very challenging. I've been trying to clean up some trophies in there. We're both pretty big time completionists when it comes to trophy collection in particular. And I was still like 2 trophies away from getting the 100 in Solar Ash. I had to beat the game on whatever the hardcore mode is. So I finished that up, and that was grueling and difficult and awful. But I did it. And then I had to beat the game in like under 2.5 hours, I think. And the first time I gave that a try, I did it on easy mode, which is what you probably should do. Mm-hmm. The first time I gave that a try, I was at the last anomaly, but I was like 13 minutes away from the cutoff time. I was like, I don't think I can make it in time. And so I just sort of abandoned that run and just started over. But I got it the second time.
That would be so discouraging to me to have to do that.
It was really upsetting.
And I saw you realize that during your stream, which you could check out DiscoCola at twitch.tv/DiscoCola if you want to see some of these trophy chases. But you eventually did it, and I really liked watching the micro stream you did at the end. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I was just like, I think I was just really close, after one of my streams. I was like, okay, I'm spent. My gas tank is empty. I'm falling asleep in the chair. I think I literally did doze off in the chair for a second. So I had to quit.
People are like, did DiscoCola die during midstream?
I don't think it's been that bad yet, but it could get there. Anyways, I was like, I'll just turn it on tomorrow. We'll stream for like 14 minutes. And that's what I did. I beat the last boss. I've had a couple of those last boss micro streams lately too, like SteamWorld Dig, Anyways, so I got Solar Ash done, and there's a lot of other games that I'm behind on from previous seasons. Luckily, many of them I didn't stream, so I can just play because of my new work schedule that I'm trying, where I get to play for about an hour every night after work instead of just not having that time exist. So
there you go. So you have more consistent game times, and that must be good for preparation for the podcast.
Preparation for the podcast, catching up on old stuff. I started Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collection finally.
Finally.
Haven't even touched it. Came out almost a year ago now.
You've been wanting to touch that for a long time.
Yeah.
And now you can touch it.
Yeah.
Well, since you did get the platinum in Solar Ash, the custom here is to play you a little celebratory trophy sound.
Little jingling.
Yes, so I hope you enjoy a little bit. Wait a second.
Is that the right? I don't think
that was the right one. Hold on.
Come on.
Let me just see. Oh, there we go. That's
Okay.
the one. That's the one.
That's for super expert mode. That doesn't exist on the PS4.
Yeah, but we'll give it to you anyway.
Thank you.
Just this once. Don't be spoiled. Before we move on, if you're listening to Underplayed right now, thank you, and we love you. Please consider giving us a follow and a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you haven't already. It takes just a few seconds, and it goes a long way. And with that, it is time for our secret games.
The secret games. Secret games that you're playing. Yes. The secret games.
In Secret Games, we're each going to reveal a game we've been playing in secret the past few weeks. We're going to review it. I don't know what DiscoCola's been playing these past few weeks. He doesn't know what I've been playing. We can choose a game that has something to do with our featured game, SOMA. It could be something completely different. DiscoCola usually falls into the former camp. I usually fall into the latter camp. But we'll see what DiscoCola has cooking for us. Let the mystery be no more. Reveal and review your secret game for episode 51 of Underplayed.
My secret game this episode is a horror puzzle game, and this is going to sound familiar to you. It comes from Game Grumps, and it is called Homebody.
Homebody.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
I have heard of this game before.
Yep. If
Yes.
it sounds familiar, this is a game we talked about on the podcast No Small Games in the Secret Santa episode where the two of us were guests. And we had originally planned to record this episode the week before we recorded that one, but plans changed. So, Bopo, for whatever it is worth, I assure you that this Secret Santa game was planned all along. All the same, I did send you that trailer.
Cool. So this was the game that DiscoCola picked for our friend Cater Blossom to play in that
Yes.
episode. And if you want to hear another perspective after you hear DiscoCola's, you can listen to that episode of No Small Games from, it is by this point a while back. We're recording this episode in a completely different time, but I think it will be a few months after that No Small Games episode when you're hearing this. So there's still a good separation. Okay. I will watch that trailer you sent while you talk.
So, yes, Homebody follows Emily as she is set to spend the night with her friends in an annual tradition of observing the Perseids meteor shower. This year, the usual group of 5 are meeting at a bit of like an Airbnb situation at a house with an owner who just leaves these like incredibly particular set of rules about everything. It's really wild, and that's sort of what they talk about throughout the beginning of the night.
If you want a well-kept Airbnb, like, that's what you got to do.
You got to do that, lock everybody in, put these elaborate steam and electrical locks on every door. You learn on the way to this like remote Airbnb that Emily suffers from some pretty extreme social anxiety and or OCD. And this is shown in the opening of the game where Emily pulls over to the side of the road to make a phone call in seeking of consolation of some sort ahead of this meeting. It also seems like she intentionally delayed her commute by multiple hours and has multiple prepared false excuses for her tardiness. Upon arrival, the night doesn't seem particularly strange. As someone that is frequently but less frequently tardy to friend gatherings, Emily's arrival is very much in line with a tardy arrival. Everyone in the house is already about their business, having already settled in, and then each comes out to greet you with a moderate level of concern due to Emily's being late multiple hours, after the agreed upon start time. And as a self-described homebody, this is something I've experienced to at least a smaller degree. So it seems pretty authentic in my experience. After arriving, you're encouraged by the game to catch up with your old friends with some small talk. Most conversations will intermittently give you 3 dialogue options to choose from. As the in-game clock rolls on. Things begin to become more and more spooky. For example, you're locked inside the house, and at a certain point in the night, lightning will strike the house, and all of the power will go out. And then not long after that, your friends will begin dying one by one. There's a creature in the house killing all of your friends, and it eventually kills you as well. However, it won't be long before you wake up in the same night that you arrived at this remote home with your friends. This is a time loop game, my friends.
Yes.
And from here, it's Emily's duty to explore the house and discover the secrets hidden in this home built by a man that has similar social hangups as Emily, and discover a way to escape this time loop where Emily and her friends are murdered night after night after night after night. Homebody becomes a horror survival puzzle game, but in my opinion, at its very core, at its heart, it is first and foremost a puzzle game. You see, the lock on the front door is sort of sealed by this special electrical box, and from this electrical box, you can follow the cables to another electrical box, and this secondary electrical box has cables that lead into different points in the house, and from there, you can begin to see the pathway to solving the puzzles that will eventually unlock the front door. So it is very much a puzzle game first. And though there's a lot more to the game than this on a story level, providing much more than that would actually kind of be spoilery. So I'm going to avoid, unfortunately, a lot of the greater overall story.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because we do avoid spoilers on this show. So thank you for being mindful about that.
Yeah, of course. So again, we're in the season of the puzzle game, as it turns out. And
yeah, so many puzzles this season.
It's wearing on me. My brain is becoming so enlarged that
You're
it's
becoming so smart.
collapsing under its own weight. But there is still loads that I loved in Homebody. I think the overall visual design and art direction is very appealing. My favorite art style in games may be a certain kind of side-scrolling pixel art. But low poly isn't too far behind, and I've had a lot of love for low poly in the last couple of years in particular. This isn't quite as low poly as I usually like, but it is certainly like a great love letter to that early PS1 era of low poly games that have sort of like cinematic camera angles. So yeah, details are simple where they need to be, and yet everything has enough definition to be elevated and more approachable for the less nostalgic audiences.
I'd say the biggest way it sort of looks like a throwback sort of visual style is there are just really jagged edges. You know, it adds this layer of like kind of unease, I would imagine, maybe.
And it gets a little like apparent whenever the camera is maybe doing a sweeping pan across a wider perspective, and you see those jagged edges just like sort of
wavering, jittering.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think the game does a great job of making your ultimate goal very clear. Get out of the house. It's like solving a maze by starting at the end of the maze and going backward. I really like troubleshooting and reverse engineering solutions in my day-to-day life, and that's what this game is. Here is this lock on the door, follow the cables, and from there, lead to puzzles that you need to solve in order to unlock the door, and maybe solve other puzzles on the way there. Many of the puzzles are actually pretty difficult. Solutions will often be located in opposite ends of the house, or a puzzle might be able to be accessed pretty early in the game, but their solution might be at the end of another really difficult line of puzzles. That part's not what I'm placing here in my likes column. In fact, that can actually be really frustrating. But what this game does have is a character. It's an absent member of the friend group that will sometimes appear to Emily in between loops. If there is a certain puzzle solution missing from your memory log, this character will give you hints. And then if you go a few more loops without solving this key puzzle, he will just outright tell you how to solve it.
Oh.
And this can help you from beating your head against the wall because, again, some of these puzzles are really, really convoluted. Speaking of the memory log, I think this is a great addition to a puzzle game like this. It's a lot like the ship log in Outer Wilds, but it's less like an archaeologist's notes and more straightforward. It shows you like a flowchart that displays which puzzles lead to which puzzles, and then the very straightforward answer to each puzzle. The door code is 722. End of log entry. And since this is a time loop game and many puzzles are sequential, this is sort of vital to being able to beat the game, in my opinion, especially since the time before the killer starts showing up each night is actually incredibly short. You don't have a 22-minute loop, and as you do
it's
in
like
Outer
a fraction
Wilds.
of that.
Yeah.
And you're inputting all the information you learn, right? Like the game, your character doesn't remember the code to the thing. You have to manually input things, right?
Well, I mean, both are true.
Okay.
She remembers every loop.
She remembers every loop, but you, the player, do you have to input a code to a door every time?
Yeah.
Yes. That's what I remember from No Small Games recording too. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I like in Homebody is the way dialogue is handled after a certain point in the game. Near the beginning, it can be a bit much. There's a big dialogue tree with each character, and even when I think I'm picking every option, I'm sure that I end up missing a lot. But I think the point of this is to build an understanding of the dynamics that Emily shares with each individual friend. But eventually, after multiple loops of dying and watching your friends die, Emily will have dialogue options where she's talking to people about the murderer and the time loop. But when you actually select them, Emily will say something totally different and much more mundane. This could be just a supernatural symptom of the time loop, but I like to think that this is representing an inability to communicate. Like, I'm projecting myself onto Emily here. I often have things in my head, sometimes things that need to be said, but I would never, ever, ever say them because they are hard things to say, hard things to hear. So it's easier to just go along. And I love this. I love that the game built this in somehow.
Yeah, you've called yourself like non-confrontational.
Is
if that's
super
okay,
duper.
If that's okay to say.
Yeah. To an extreme degree, non-confrontational. So I this is non-confrontation in game form, and it's really fascinating to see. I'm gonna mix two things into one here, and I'm gonna mix the setting and sound design as one point. And I'm mixing these into one point because I think each one supports the other so much. The game takes place in a really old house, and so many of the sounds are the sounds of an old house. And then on top of that, the house and its layout, it feels like an old house. And then you explore even further, particularly into the cellar, and the boundaries of the house expand and start to feel strange and dreamlike, but still grounded as if they actually are a part of this house. And it's paralleling the story at roughly the same time in such a fascinating way. So like, as the story starts to feel more strange and paranormal and dreamlike, so does the house, but it all still feels possible in a way. It's hard to explain. And then the last thing that's really cool about Homebody is that you can technically solve puzzles in almost any order, kind of. The game sort of has three main acts, I would say, and each concluding with one big puzzle. However, if you know all the solutions in the game, or you happen to just get really lucky somehow, you can pretty much skip right to the final ending. No Act 1, no Act 2, just the end of the game. However, this is a kind of a fun and cheeky thing on the part of the developers. You can't do it on the very first night of the game. You have to die at least once.
Okay.
After you've died once, you can just go for the goal.
And you like that possibility of like non-linearity or just open-endedness with how you approach things, right?
Yeah. It's like in Outer Wilds. If you know the code to the teleporter,
right,
you can just go for it.
I could sit down next to you, never having played Homebody myself, and you could tell me how to beat the game.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have to do like what 12 minutes makes you do and go through at least like a dozen or 20 loops or whatever it is to get to the end. Yeah.
So those are a bunch of things that I really like about Homebody. Homebody does have a few big issues for me, though. First and foremost is the camera and controls. I haven't played any of the early Resident Evil games on PS1, but this seems to work pretty similar to those games. Certain areas of the map will have a set camera in the 3D space, and so when you cross the threshold for that camera angle to change, you might be pushing the L stick in the complete opposite direction that you're actually now moving.
Sure. Disorienting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emily will continue, I think, traveling straight regardless of which way you're pressing the stick, but
Yeah.
only as long as you don't shift the direction that you're holding.
That happens to me where like if that perspective switches and I'm holding the wrong direction, I automatically want to change it and then you go the wrong way.
Yep, exactly.
It's like I was trying to make it make sense and
super jarring. Don't much care for that, and I often spent many times running in the direction I just came from, and many times that would eventually kill me because I would run into the killer. I'm trying to, dodge all these camera angle changes right next to the killer, and it just leads me right into its arms. Next thing, and I alluded to this already, is that some of the puzzles are just too convoluted, or the location of the solutions are in just such wild places, and then there are some puzzles whose mechanics are just not clearly explained. Luckily, many of the puzzles will stop the in-game clock, so you are less likely to get killed in the act of actually solving the puzzles. But if you are working on a puzzle whose actual puzzle components are baffling, that just feels a little too stressful for a time loop game. Most story bits are doled out in flashbacks, and some of these are very impactful. In fact, I would say one of the most impactful moments of the season came from one of these flashbacks. Just one of the stories that Emily's friend was telling in a car ride, just really hit me. But a lot of these just didn't seem to carry a lot of significance. And I had a hard time sort of piecing together a timeline for some of these events. And maybe the timeline doesn't actually matter too much. In many ways, I found the story of the owner of the house a little easier to piece together. And I really liked how his story served as a bit of a cautionary tale for Emily. But as far as like Emily's history with her friends, I had a hard time like keeping track of who did what happened to who in this situation, and why it creates this dynamic with Emily. And then the last thing that really didn't jive with me, one of Emily's friends at the house in particular is given a greater amount of significance at a certain point in your progression, but nothing about their relationship seemed significantly different or notable to me. So I don't understand why this friend in particular suddenly has like such a weight in the greater story.
Yeah, that does sound a little arbitrary.
Yeah, it makes me concerned that I missed something in some super significant flashback or piece of dialogue that I just didn't happen to read correctly. Yeah. Like, this character does have a starring role in a couple flashbacks, but so does everyone else.
Sure.
So I'm just so sure that I missed something, that I'm misunderstanding, and that's upsetting.
Yeah, and if there is something that's missable, but then that emphasis is put on later, then it's like maybe that other thing shouldn't have been as missable,
right?
If you're going to lean on it so much.
Yeah. And I'm very confident that I saw all of the flashbacks or whatever. Okay, because eventually I ran out. But
maybe you didn't miss anything.
Yeah, I just didn't pick up on it. All in all, Homebody was a game that I had assumed would have a lot of puzzle elements, as many of these kinds of games do, but I didn't expect the puzzles to go so hard, and I did end up consulting a guide on multiple occasions, as I usually do. Playing through this game, it gave me one of the greatest senses of urgency I've felt since we played the game 12 minutes. Mm-hmm. I think I had an overall positive experience, but I also remember being so frustrated at so many junctures. So I'm very confused about how I feel about the game, but it must be doing something mostly right if I still think fondly while also recollecting great levels of frustration. I think I do recommend this to you, Bopo.
Okay.
But I have recommended puzzle games that are more your speed just this season alone.
Sure.
I'm stuck between a 7.5 and an 8. I like it more than some 8s, but about the same as some 7.5s. So I'm just going to go with an 8 for Homebody.
Okay. Wonderful. You've answered some of my questions that I've had along the way. Like, I was going to ask, how much did you get stuck? It turned out it was multiple occasions, and you used a mixture of the guide and then that character who visits you from time to time to help solve things.
Yep. Okay.
And then would you say, with not piecing together everything with the story, when it comes to Emily and the owner of the house, would you say that Emily is discovering more about herself through this house and its construction and its owner?
It's hard to say if that is actually impacting Emily in the moment that she's discovering more about this home's owner. I think there is some sort of acknowledgement that she could possibly fall into some of the same traps that this person had in his life.
Okay.
I think she does have that level of acknowledgement to some degree, and maybe decides to approach her life in a different way, maybe
Okay.
a little bit. But
So she might have a new lens to look at things through other than hanging out with her friends.
yeah, at the very least, I think she acknowledges that there is another perspective
Okay.
that she could approach her life with.
Cool. All right. Well, I think you've done a good job at avoiding the spoilers. I get what the game is, and I am interested to play it now that you've recommended it to me. And what can we play this on?
We can play this on PS4, PS5, Switch, Xbox One, Windows, Xbox Series X, and S.
And did you play it on PlayStation?
I played it on PS4.
PS4. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. It is time for my secret game. My secret game is called Kaze and the Wild Masks. Have you heard of Kaze and the Wild Masks?
I have heard the name, but I don't know anything else about it.
Okay. You can check out a trailer that I just sent you.
Ooh, okay. This looks like it could be a DiscoCola game. I'm going to let this roll while you go.
Okay. Yeah. And that trailer starts with some cinematic stuff, just some like stills, but then you get into gameplay. So Kaze and the Wild Masks is a 2021 2D side-scrolling platformer. It was developed by Pixel Hive and published by Soadesco, I think is how we say that. It's whether
Soy Disco. Those are I's, not E's.
Yeah, that's vegetarian DiscoCola on our hands. But that actually kind of fits the story of this game, as we'll find out very soon.
Oh.
The game synopsis from the Steam storefront reads, quote, "Go on a journey as Kaze in this 90s classics-inspired platformer. When the Crystal Islands get cursed, Kaze needs to save her friend Hogo while facing enraged living vegetables. Find the wild masks to unleash the powers of the legendary guardians and master land, sky, and sea." End quotes. So Kaze and the Wild Masks is this throwback pixel art 2D platformer with a gameplay style that's very similar to Donkey Kong Country. If you've played Donkey Kong Country, I would say 1 and 2 especially, this game is going to feel familiar in a lot of ways. You play as Kaze. Kaze is this periwinkle-colored rabbit with very long ears, a red scarf, gloves, and tennis shoes. And the game is speechless. It does have brief cutscenes. We open on Kaze and her friend Hogo exploring some ruins. They find some kind of mystical ring or loop, and when they touch it, it knocks Kaze back, while Hogo is trapped inside. But Hogo's spirit remains behind and hangs out with Kaze as Kaze is going on this journey that ensues. And they also cause a curse to fall upon the Crystal Islands where they live, and it turns all the vegetables feral. So you've got evil carrots, you've got evil tomatoes and onions and so forth. And this setup actually also reminds me of Grapple Dog that I reviewed several seasons ago. That was a side-scrolling pixel art 2D platformer whose inciting incident also involved exploring some ruins and unleashing an evil. And it also had gameplay similar to Donkey Kong Country. So I kind of like that there's this sort of subgenre of games that are kind of following in those footsteps. And the goal of Kaze and the Wild Masks is to traverse 4 islands, each of which have 8 or 9 levels. And in each level, you're side-scrolling, you're platforming. The levels range in setting from grasslands to underground caverns to deserts and snowy mountains. There are places filled with lots of acid. I would say that describes most of the kinds of biomes and areas. And you move sideways, you jump, you can spin into enemies, you can take a sustained glide with your ears, because she has very long ears that let her like kind of float down. Kaze can use a spin next to a ledge to get an extra momentum jump. She can also jump on top of enemies to defeat them. And as you make your way through the levels, you encounter the titular wild masks. And these are spots that are predefined where you don a mask that transforms Kaze's appearance and ability set. So there are 4 of these masks. There's the tiger mask, which gives Kaze the ability to dash in the air and climb walls. There's the eagle mask that gives you the ability to fly. And this feels a lot like when you become Squawks, the parrot, in Donkey Kong Country 2, if I may draw a parallel for people. And then there's the lizard mask, which turns any level that's in into an auto runner. And Kaze can do a double jump and a slam attack as she's running super quickly. And lizard mask areas feel a lot like mine carts and roller coasters from Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, respectively.
My favorite.
Yes. Actually, no sarcasm. Those levels are some of my favorites in those games. Then there's the shark mask, which lets Kaze swim. And then there are other ways Kaze is like other 90s platformers. The levels are full of these purple crystals. And if you collect 100 of those, you get a purple crystal medal for that stage. There are bonus rooms hidden in the levels where you do a really brief activity like collecting gems or defeating all the enemies in a room. And when you do those, you get green bonus crystals, and each level has 2 bonus rooms like that to find. Then, if you find all the hidden rooms and all the green bonus crystals on an entire island, that unlocks a bonus level. And each normal level also has the letters K, A, Z, and E for Kaze to collect. Each level also has a time trial you can activate. You can run through the levels really fast, and the fastest times get you a gold medal for the stage. And the game is also keeping track of which levels you've completed without getting hit. So there are lots of reasons to revisit levels and collect things. You can pick up hearts that give yourself an extra hit before you die. And the goal is simply to get to the end of all the stages. There's a boss at the end of each of the 4 islands. You have to defeat those before going on to the next island. And you're trying to save your friend Hogo and free the Crystal Islands from this curse. So here's what I liked about Kaze and the Wild Masks. There is a really great flow state you reach in this game when you start to understand the formula of the platforming. The game has a really rhythmic construction to its levels. And I feel like if you practice them enough and you know what you're doing, you can kind of start to run virtually without stopping while you're jumping on enemies' heads and climbing ladders and ledges and gliding to create really satisfying movement. So I like how this game feels. You're kind of sight reading levels, or at least I was at a certain point. I started to really want to chase like the speed run stuff and the not getting hit idea. And so I was trying to go through levels as efficiently and carefully as I could. So I was really enticed to chase a lot of the completion in this game because all of it felt so nice. And you can also kind of play at your own pace too. So if you really want to slow down, you can totally do that. The game has a great amount of checkpoints too, so it feels pretty forgiving. I love the character designs, especially Kaze. She looks really cool. She's very brave and determined. She feels kind of like a tough character. Even though we don't hear her speak her thoughts, we hear her grunt when she jumps.
Oh, okay.
And physically, she just looks really courageous. And then the variety in level designs and ideas. This is where I could just sit here and list example after example of how this game copies games like Donkey Kong Country to great effect. For instance, there are levels that are very much like Sticker Brush from Donkey Kong Country 2.
Seen that.
There are levels that focus on the idea of, like in Donkey Kong Country, jumping into a barrel that shoots you. Except here, it's like crossbows that shoot you to other crossbows. And you have to sort of line up shots. Yeah. The bonus levels explore really fun ideas. These are the levels you're unlocking one of on each island. And they just do something that's totally unexpected. There is one called Beats and Bounces. And this is a level where you're going from the start of the level to the end, jumping on enemies' heads and doing either short or long jumps between all the enemies, and there's just an endless pit below you. So all you're doing to progress is jumping on enemies and chaining together, bops on their heads. Chasing the completion was really fun. There are relatively easy collectibles to find, like the letters and the purple crystals. So going through levels on the first time, you're going to find a lot of that stuff easily. But then you need a careful eye to find some of the more obscure things, like the bonus rooms, So there were things I found really easily. There were things I missed the first time. It's a great balance there. And then going back through to chase the speed runs and the flawless runs added new dimensions to how I played. There's also a trophy in this game for getting credits in 2 hours or less, and I did it in 90 minutes. And
dude.
It felt really good to do that. And I saved that one for last because by the time I tried it, I knew all the levels. I was really practiced. I knew what the game was going to throw at me. So I felt really skilled doing that. What didn't work so well for me in Kaze and the Wild Masks, there's a little bit of variety here with dislikes. There are load times in this game that can be very long sometimes, especially when you load in and out of levels. It can take like 10 to 20 seconds sometimes. Sometimes when you switch from island to island, the game can almost like momentarily freeze and you think that your game might have crashed, but it didn't. You just have to sit there for a bit. And I also don't like swimming in this game. It can be really hard to turn on a dime. It's really hard to stop yourself from running into obstacles sometimes, especially when you're doing the speed run stuff. So I just wish you could maneuver more easily in the water. And then the enemy variety, I think, could be a little bit more diverse. Sometimes it feels like you're defeating dozens of the same enemy in a level.
Mm-hmm.
You're just defeating beats after beats or carrot after carrot, and you sort of like start to see the same models over and over. So I would have liked to see more kinds of vegetables used, maybe. The hit boxes for certain environmental hazards can be mysterious too. Sometimes you clip really far into like a spiked ceiling, but you don't get hit. And then you're wondering, why didn't I get hit? And it feels like you're kind of getting away with murder.
Right.
But then other times you overlap with one of those crossbows that shoots you quite a good amount, but you fall through into the endless pit and you die.
Darn it. Yeah.
So it's a little mysterious sometimes about where the hitboxes are, how far I need to get to things to actually hit those things. And then a few levels are too difficult, in my opinion, compared to their peers. Like 3 levels I wrote down are called Zip Lizard, Haunted Lake, and Circuit Capers. And I found that the levels surrounding these levels, like on either side, were much easier. And so I got stuck in some levels like way more than other levels. And then finally, 2D platformers don't need to have a terribly complex story. They don't need to have a crazy setup. But in Kaze and the Wild Masks, there is an antagonist that sort of just shows up, and that villain isn't given any kind of background or story. They just sort of show up eventually. And so I would have liked to see a little bit more setup to the story if they're going to commit to that idea, I think. But overall, Kaze and the Wild Masks is this platformer that is revering the classics that it's sort of copying, classics that are now like a quarter century old. And it's taking a lot of their ideas it's putting them on shuffle. Yeah, sorry to do that to you. But I like that it's sort of remixing a lot of their ideas. This game wants you to flow and find the rhythm in each level. And when you do, you don't want to stop moving. And I find that to be really fun. This is a really solid platformer with a handful of pretty minor setbacks for me. So I'm going to rate it an 8 out of 10.
All right. That was pretty close to what I guessed.
Yeah. And it's playable on PC, Mac, Linux, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, which is the version I played, and Xbox One.
Excellent. So I want to follow up real quickly on one of the things you mentioned there toward the end is the hitbox stuff that you were talking about, especially with like the crossbows.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like it can be particularly frustrating because when you have a mechanic like that, you're obviously over an open pit, and the goal is to hit a lot of these crossbows in a row.
Yeah, you're trying
eventually
to line up your shots, wait for the right timing, and press that input to shoot yourself into the right spot. Yeah.
So is this missing the crossbow happening frequently, or is it like every once in a while where it's like, man, I just spent all these jumps?
No, and there are very few levels that even do the crossbow thing. And that's going back to this game just exploring lots of different gameplay ideas. There are only a handful of levels that do the crossbows that I can remember. I wasn't getting frustrated by it at all, but It's just something I noticed actually more so with obstacles that hurt you. I would sometimes, like in the levels where you're flying and you have to like repeatedly tap the button to maintain your height.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'd tap it a little bit too much and my head would bump into the spike ceiling. And it's like, oh gosh, am I going to get hit? And sometimes I could kind of cheat that a little bit. I would overlap and I wouldn't get hit.
Yeah,
So
that sounds like what was happening to me in Downwell. So I'm very familiar with that feeling. So I have a question about some of the bosses. Is it sort of like a Mario rules, and I guess maybe Donkey Kong Country? I haven't played the Donkey Kong Country games. Is it like in Mario rules where you beat the levels and then the last level is just the boss fight?
the last level is just the boss fight at the end of an island, and there are 4 islands. So you're defeating 4 bosses, and the very last boss in this game is substantial. It's very long, and usually they have phases. They're throwing attacks at you. You dodge them, and then they open up a weak spot, and then you have an opportunity to hit it.
Cool.
Then they do that like 2 or 3 more times.
Cool.
Yeah, that's how it works.
I'm looking forward to that. And then the last thing, the titular wild masks.
Mhm.
I seem to recall in Donkey Kong Country, the little bit that I have played, is that not every level has one of those animal rides.
Yes.
Is that sort of the same case here, or are you running into masks a lot more frequently?
Yeah, that's kind of the same case here. There are levels where you don't have any masks.
Okay.
I don't know the exact ratio of like levels that have masks and levels that don't, but maybe it's like half and half, or maybe it's like 60% of levels have masks, 40% don't. It's something like that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, cool. I had a mask idea for a game once, and this is just my style anyway, so I'm definitely going to play this someday.
Nice. Cool.
I can be apprehensive whenever I see like a humanoid animal as the main character. Like,
yeah.
if you spend enough time on the internet, that can be a red flag sometimes. But this looks really
Oh,
cool,
no.
so I'm very happy.
Are you a furry or whatever?
I am averse to exploring that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will point out that this game is overwhelmingly positive on Steam. It has over 1,100 reviews at time of recording, and at least 95% of those reviews are positive, which makes your game overwhelmingly positive on Steam. So it is well rated, and I do recommend this to you as someone who likes
Oh yeah.
games with like throwback styles and just, platformers. It's a good time, and it's not a terribly long game. But if you are chasing 100% completion, you will spend probably a lot of hours in this game. I think I spent around 20 hours getting the platinum in this game.
Are you serious? You
Yeah.
played this for 20 hours?
My game clock on PlayStation 5, I played the PS4 version on PS5.
as you do. Yeah.
The game clock, I think it says 21 hours, but I know some of that is idle time. So it might be like 19 or 20 hours that I spent in this game.
Well, I'm worried about the no-hit levels, but apart from that, if the controls feel good and they
Yeah.
look like they feel good,
They do.
then I'm not too concerned.
Really, it's just about repetition, because you go through, you collect stuff, you get an understanding for where enemies are, then you remember where they are. Then you might do 2 more sort of cleanup runs in a level where you're finding all the rest of the collectibles you missed and trying to not get hit. Then you do the speed run attempt. So really it just comes down to I'm attempting these levels 3 or 4 times each to get the platinum.
Right.
And so that's just going to take time. And there are 30 to 40 levels in the game. So it's not that long. It's just you're repeating them. So I think you can do it. I think you'll have fun with it. Those are our secret games, Homebody and Kaze and the Wild Masks. Let's move on to our review of SOMA. It is our featured game. SOMA is a psychological horror game originally released in 2015. It was developed and published by Frictional Games. The game synopsis from the Steam storefront reads, quote, "From the creators of Amnesia: The Dark Descent comes SOMA, a sci-fi horror game set below the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, struggle to survive a hostile world that will make you question your very existence." End quote. This is a first-person game with a sci-fi horror setting. This game came out in 2015, and it is set in the year 2015. You play as Simon Jarrett, who is a Canadian man suffering from a brain injury he sustained from a car crash that killed his work colleague. And Simon gets contacted by this PhD student named David Munchie, who wants to scan Simon's brain so he can study it and possibly perform brain reconstruction from what he finds on the scans. And the game starts on the morning of this procedure. Simon wakes up in his apartment, and you're now controlling Simon. And you have to look for some tracer fluid, which we have a story about later. You hop on the subway, and you arrive at Munchie's office, where you sit in a chair for the scan. So all seems to be going according to plan. But after a bright white flash and a moment of darkness, you wake up in an abandoned underwater research facility called PATHOS-II in the year 2104, which is 89 years into the future. So,
Whoops.
Yeah, something went wrong.
That was a nap.
It certainly was. Yeah, a Rip Van Winkle situation going on. No, actually, what's really going on is a mystery. But here's what we slowly learn. And there are a lot of details here, so I'm going to try to explain it clearly. So PATHOS-II, the facility you wake up on, was developing a space gun designed to launch objects into outer space. Simon meets this woman on the communication system of this place called Catherine Chun. And Catherine's job was to develop a device called the Ark, which she and her colleagues were planning to launch into space. And it turns out that everyone on PATHOS-II became the last humans on Earth when a comet collided with Earth and killed everyone on the surface. But no one is really there anymore. PATHOS-II is run by an AI called the Warden Unit, or the WOW for short, and this AI has gone rogue and is controlling robots and machinery everywhere. And Simon encounters robots who are possessed by the WOW. Many of them are infused with the minds of people who once worked on PATHOS-II. And a lot of these people think they're still alive and human, which is really morbid to think about.
Yeah.
And so the goal of the game is to just discover why Simon is in the future, find out what's going on with PATHOS-II, and work with Catherine to resume her ARC project and just find out what that project is all about. So there are lots of other reveals about what's happening, but we will leave it there for the story synopsis and keep spoilers at a minimum. But I will say there are strong themes about what makes us human and how the mind and consciousness work. The name of the game, SOMA, comes from a Greek word meaning body. Specifically, this interpretation is the body as distinct from the soul, mind, or psyche. So that is kind of the story setup. I was wondering if you could help me set up the game with just talking about what you do as the player in SOMA.
Yeah, so as Simon Jarrett, the player, you can jump, you can pick up and inspect objects, you can throw objects, you can lean in the game.
Yes, very important mechanic.
You can lean, and you can run, right? You can run.
You can run, yes.
And that's your set of mechanics, and your goal is to interact with all the correct objects and put all the correct objects in the right spot to open all the correct doors, while also avoid detection by the WOW.
Yes, and you mentioned leaning. You know, leaning and crouching, that definitely plays a role in the stealth part of this game. There are sections of the game where there are these robots who want to hurt you, and you have to kind of sneak around corners, lean around corners to see where they're at, which direction they're facing. And so you're not doing any combat in this game. You do have a central tool, the Omni tool, that you're using to like unlock doors, and you talk to Catherine on the Omni tool. Sometimes you set your Omni tool on like a computer system to talk to Catherine and maybe unlock something. And before you leave the area, you have to remember to go back to that Omni tool and like pick it up.
Yeah.
So there are times where you're kind of separated from your Omni tool as well. And then also Simon and Catherine, they are voice acted, and they're joined by a supporting cast of characters, mostly of people who are like dead or people from the past that we're hearing through video and audio recordings too.
Think very much like BioShock audio logs and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
very important element to the story there.
Yes. And this game, you know, just being set at a facility underwater and having an inciting incident that happens very early, it does feel a lot like BioShock in a number of ways. So
maybe that's the appeal for us as far as seeking it out in the first place.
Yes.
We both love that game quite a bit.
Yes. One of my favorite games of all time is BioShock. And our annual Halloween scary game event that we do with our friends, the very first iteration of that, the very first year we did that, I think it was 2016.
It was BioShock, wasn't it?
And it was BioShock.
Yeah.
And so here we are all these years later playing SOMA. And we played this for our Halloween events. Did you want to just describe that Halloween event for people who don't know what it is, just as a concept?
Yeah, so every year we will get together. We will play a game that we agreed upon in the previous year. So if you are a longtime listener, you heard our episode covering Amnesia: The Dark Descent.
Yes.
And that was the game we played last year. And after we finished playing that last year, we decided that this year we would play SOMA.
Yes.
So all year long, we've known that we were going to play SOMA. And lucky for us that we decided on an indie horror game. They're not always indie.
Nope. Like next year, we're playing the 2019 remake of Resident Evil 2.
Right.
So when it lines up with being an indie game, we will probably cover it on our show here, just because that makes sense.
Yep. So we were lucky to sort of like pull double duty here. Yeah, it was great. I was really excited. I think SOMA was actually my idea as far as like which one we should play. So I was very excited when the party agreed to vote on that one.
Nice.
And then every year when we get together, Bopo buys candies that are quote unquote disgusting. And whether or not that's actually true is subjective. I find Raisinets to be quite tasty, as well as Runts.
A lot of people liked the Raisinets this year, but most people disliked the Runts the other year.
I don't understand. Runts are amazing. They take too long for me to eat, so I don't eat them often.
Yeah, I get tired of them super quickly.
Yeah.
Like I'll have a handful and then I'm done with them.
Handfuls about all you need, but they are good.
Okay.
I think they have great flavors.
Okay.
Anyways.
Shout out to Runts.
Shout out to Runts. Shout out to Raisinets.
If Runts or Raisinets want to sponsor Underplayed, then we're available. We're willing to work something out there.
But yeah, that's the party.
That's the party.
Bopo hosts it, makes a lot of food. Our friend Grant from the Limbo episode brings coffee.
Yes. This is the same group we played Carrion with too, from way back in season 1 too. So we've done this for years, and sometimes it is an indie game that is noteworthy. And then we had 15 total attendees at the party, 6 of whom took turns playing the game. So we're passing the controller. And when you're playing with other people, there's the experience of just having someone else in the room and how that person commenting on things can change how you're absorbing the game, or maybe just, accidental things will happen with having someone else in the room. So to kind of help communicate what the feeling was at the party, we have a handful of sound bites to play for you today.
Yeah, we recorded the room.
We recorded the room with everybody's consent, of course. And there are moments that tickled me about having other people in the room. So here's an example of how just someone else being in the room can change how you perceive the game. And this is when you, DiscoCola, were playing SOMA and you heard someone's phone go off and you thought it was part of the game.
Yes. Oh, come back.
Wait.
I want that music back. I love those little instruments in these kinds of games. It's my favorite.
Oh, that was my
That was his
on my
phone.
phone.
Oh, I'm so sad.
Yeah, it's the alarm on my phone.
Was it truly? My disappointment
I
would be
thought it was.
immeasurable.
Yeah, I think I was joking. I was like,
That's
no,
we're
I was
dumb.
doing like,
No, we're just
why would that music back?
No, it's very common in games like scary games.
Okay.
Yeah, you had a point there that kind of idea does happen in scary games.
Yeah, that little music box plinky sound. I love that in games. It's so terrifying, and I wanted more of it.
I know. But this game was very atmospheric, very kind of scary. And having other people in the room can really augment that feeling of being scared when people are screaming and yelling in reaction to being chased by a monster.
Oh
and
man,
so,
I hope this is censored.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay.
I had to do quite a bit of censoring in certain sound bites, but this is an example of being chased in this game and a time where we discovered like going through a door and closing the door doesn't always make you safe.
Close it. Break the window. Break the window.
And usually, it's always one person controlling the game, and they're responsible for what happens. And then you've got 7 other people screaming over them, like telling them what to do. That's kind of the vibe of what's going on. And it's just really fun. So I hope that helps paint the picture for people. I also just want to acknowledge that this is Frictional Games' follow-up to Amnesia: The Dark Descent, previous featured game. We might bring up comparisons to Amnesia, but most of our intents for this review will just be looking at SOMA as, the game that it is.
Yeah, and I think it does so much differently anyway. So.
It does, yeah. So if you have thoughts on that, feel free to throw those in. And with that, I'd love to know your thoughts on SOMA, DiscoCola.
Yeah, SOMA is something I've been excited for you and many in our Halloween group to experience. Previously, I'd never actually played the game myself, but I had watched a playthrough of it and was blown away by the impact of the story beats. And so that's why I really, really wanted us to play this one. So yeah, up first, I really love the setting of the game. Underwater is just so upsetting compared to other naturally uninhabitable places because it's such an everyday part of our lives, and many things do live in the ocean. It's not a desolate place like the surface of a moon or something, but you're not supposed to be there. And like space, if one thing goes wrong, you would normally be super duper dead very quickly.
Yes.
So you just push the wrong button on a door and that's it, done. Good night.
Right.
So it's a really upsetting place to be, but that I think amplifies the tension of the game, and I love being underwater in horror games, as it turns out. I really like the technology in this game, because there is, in my opinion, a reasonable expectation of progress here. Technology is exploding and expanding exponentially in our current day, and that's true. But many sci-fi stories go super overboard.
Yes.
To me, this level of technology seems, for the most part, attainable by the 22nd century.
Yeah, this is 89 years in the future. Sometimes we watch, sci-fi shows or movies that are set multiple hundreds of years in the future, and it's just hard to imagine how plausible that stuff is. This is less than a century away, and I agree with you. I can see a lot of this stuff happening.
Yeah, and a lot of it, there's still buttons. It's not everything is a touchscreen. There's still toggles. There's still keypads.
There's analog-y stuff here and there.
And that just makes it seem much more grounded, much more plausible, reasonable expectation for how technology could develop. One of my favorite things about the game is the relationship between Simon and Catherine. I think Simon adjusts to this totally bonkers situation at what I feel is not only an appropriate pace, but with appropriate response. And I think that response adapts and changes as the game goes on in a really fascinating way. When he meets Catherine, she is stern when necessary, supportive when Simon needs a push, and withholding in order to keep Simon grounded in this nearly hopeless situation. But then Catherine will also be cold and dismissive in certain situations that will really make you at times uncomfortable with Catherine and maybe make you at odds with her. And they are a duo of just great dynamic emotional range. And it's really fascinating because neither of them are currently talking to each other in living bodies.
Yes.
Is what I'll say.
Yeah. It's kind of a lot to wrap your mind around in this game. But they ask a lot of questions that I myself am asking, or they ask them in ways I didn't know how to ask out loud. Just kind of stray thoughts going through my mind as I'm playing. They talk about a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. I think the controls feel sufficiently good. There was a bit of emphasis on the lean, and when it was my turn, I just didn't really use it. Though I just sort of went for it. But all the same, the controls almost always felt good. Just the right movement speed, just the right jump height, and just the right throw distance for this kind of game. I think if it was another kind of game, your throw distance is a little generous, but I think in this one it is good. I think the atmosphere created by the art direction and sound effects and the world building makes for a compelling sense of unease, even without the WoW spreading throughout the facilities. Everything just feels so hopeless anyways. Like, this is a place you'd want to escape from. But when you add that visual digital distortions caused by the WoW and the unsettling sound effects the WoW creates, it's just such an extra horrifying place. And on top of that, you will run into like other human and non-human human characters, and the voice performances and situations these characters are in. They add to the desperation of the overall journey. You got to get out or you will be trapped. And being trapped can take many different forms. So
Yes,
you really
totally,
got to get out.
Totally.
And maybe my favorite thing about the game is the story, but especially the ending. I have contemplated on a lot of the themes in this game, and have arrived at multiple different conclusions with those themes, especially consciousness. But I've never seen that theme played out so well on screen in any medium. There's maybe one other piece of media that comes into a close second, and this might be a shocker for some people, but it's an episode of Black Mirror that I think of.
Okay.
But this is easily my favorite representation of the themes of consciousness on any screen.
Wow.
But yeah, man, the first time I saw the ending and heard the dialogue associated with the end of the journey, I was chilled. I love this story so much. I do have minor complaints about the game. One, and this is probably the biggest one, is that I don't like the open ocean sections. They're so much slower and they appear so vast. They're not so open that you can easily get lost. And you confirmed that with me after you did a second playthrough. But if you have a poor sense of direction, even getting turned around can just have you heading back in the direction you came, and you might not notice until you see a super familiar building. But yeah, just a few of these stretches are long enough where you might be walking an unfortunate amount of time before you realize that you're going back in the direction you just came.
They can be relatively uneventful stretches of just walking.
Yeah.
I agree with you there. That actually is in my list of dislikes as well.
Yeah. So I ended up going the wrong way a couple of times after exploring one building in the middle of a stretch, and I was very annoyed that I had wasted everyone else's time by doing that.
When I was doing my second playthrough after our party, I was telling you how I was perceiving that, oh yeah, these are a little bit more linear than I originally thought. But after I said that to you, there were a few moments where I got turned around because it looked the same in either direction. And I go, oh no, am I about to retrace my steps and not even know it and then go all the way back?
Yep.
Yeah.
The second thing, and this is kind of minor, is that I don't care too much about the WoW, honestly. And maybe I'm missing something significant again, like with Emily's friend in Homebody. I don't know what makes for a more sinister catalytic event for the escape, but I mean, the world is already devastated by a comet.
Yes.
The deterioration of the facilities could simply come from the planet crumbling under its own devastation.
Sure.
The WoW, I think, mostly just feels like an excuse to add the horror-like jump scares and something to run from. And I kind of wonder if this game, SOMA, is still good without the WoW and maybe more just the natural crumbling of the Earth after a cataclysmic event.
Yeah, there's a lot of backstory that goes into this game, and some of it can kind of overlap or upstage other parts. You know, it seems like there's a lot going in to build this world. And I kind of agree that there are a lot of pieces, and maybe it is simpler as maybe not leaning so much on the horror stuff. So yeah, you're kind of getting into some stuff I also was thinking about before today. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And then the last thing is a small thing. And I think this game could be about 20% shorter. I think it's not painfully long, but I think there's just maybe one too many fetch quests. And so if we had just like, if we lost one open ocean section and one visit to like Lambda or something,
Yeah.
I think I'd be just a little more fond of the game overall. It's just a little bit too much. Like pull it back just a touch, and then it's like the perfect length, I think.
And for people's context, a lot of this game is going to one part of the research facility, doing something that Catherine and Simon know they need to do. And then it's like, oh, now we need to go to this part of the research facility. How do we get there? And then they have to figure out those logistics. And that's kind of the loop over and over and over. It's just going to all these different places.
And there's like 5 main facility points. And I think you hit all of them. And if we could just maybe like, oh, one of them was destroyed when, Florida sank into the sea or something. Something.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know. But just one fewer of those visits, I think, would be nice. SOMA, in the end, is one of the most compelling indie game stories I've experienced, and while I'm perfectly content with watching someone else play it in my stead, playing myself still feels good. It's one of those endings that will stick with me probably for the rest of my life, much like some of my favorite movies. It's the indie game that would make the best movie that I really hope they never, ever actually make. And though the first-person 3D exploration game style is not my favorite, especially when you add stealth. Stealth is also not my favorite. As far as the genre goes, I think it's close to perfect in most ways. I just wouldn't always enjoy actively playing it myself. But I do think that this game is like a 9.0.
Yeah, that's about what I would have guessed based on your praises for the game. Sweet. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm glad you could be there with everybody else enjoying it, and that, despite having seen the playthrough online before, you were still able to have a great time in revisiting it. And
it's different from Doki Doki Literature Club in the way where, like, when you replay Doki Doki and you know the end already, there's not much enticing you to be in the game. Soma is an action game, journey, exploration. There's a little bit more to chew on there. So it is fun to actually replay it, even if you do know the ultimate conclusion.
Well, what I found really interesting about Soma, just going into what I liked first, is I was asking so many questions about Simon's existence. I was constantly asking, like, what about Simon? Who is Simon? Are all versions of Simon Simon? Are none of them Simon? Simon. I was asking so many questions, and that just kept me going. And for people's context, I was obviously there at the party being the host and, watching people play and playing myself, taking turns every now and then. I did do a full replay that I finished the other day. So I have played this game with others and then also completely by myself 2 playthroughs. So some of what I say is influenced by, having that first interaction with it at the party. A lot of it is also influenced by doing it again by myself, where I knew what to do for the most part, and where I played on safe mode, where a lot of the interactions, the encounters with enemies are very much reduced as far as like danger, where you run into them, they're still scary, but you're not dying over and over. So I was able to kind of speed through the game faster.
Yeah, probably after you experience it the first time, it's just like game length padding after that.
Yeah, exactly. So keep that in mind. My second playthrough was speedy. I experienced the story at a different pace. And so I think that also impacts how I absorb the story again and, some of my likes and my dislikes. I love how immediately Simon is placed into this unfamiliar world. We still get a proper story set up. We get him talking on the phone. We get some voicemail messages. We get some flashes of like his dream before he wakes up in his apartment. But it's really soon after that when he arrives at the PhD student's place to do the scan. And so it feels like you're almost shot out of a cannon in this game. It's reminding me a little bit of how soon you arrive in Rapture in BioShock, going back to that comparison. I think maybe you go to Rapture a little bit sooner in BioShock than going to PATHOS-II here in Soma. But there's very little padding there at the start, and so I like that we just get into this story. I love the look of the world. I was bowled over by how immersive everything is. I think the graphics here go beyond what we see in most indie games we talk about, and it happens through lighting, it happens through set decoration, and just the communication of sci-fi ideas visually, and just sheer fidelity. You know, the graphics look amazing. So I think this game is just a stunner when it comes to how it looks. And then when it comes to the soundscape, I love the sound design of this game. When you were talking about Homebody and how that house creaks and things like that, same ideas here. We hear door creaks, we hear heartbeats, we hear the robots screech, and some of them have the thoughts and the personality, the mindset of someone who got trapped in a robot, and they're speaking their thoughts or they're screaming, and that is just harrowing and really sets the tone. And I think a lot of the horror moments that happen are effective because of the sound.
I agree.
And listening back to some moments from having people in the room with us, I was noticing how people were getting scared. And I think a lot of the reason they were getting scared is because of how it sounded. And so I'd like to play another soundbite. This is our friend Alex getting scared. I don't think he was even playing, but there was a particularly tense moment where I think you can hear the soundscape really well.
I know this is insane. Why am I getting scared? It's so much fun. That's why. Oh no! No! Wait! What are you doing? You're scared! Run! That's a proxy. Alex, you freaked out. That was not fun. Oh god! That's the same thing as last time.
I also love the simplicity of the inventory menu and just like the absence of a complex UI. There's really no UI in this game.
There's very few items you need to pick up in general. It's very streamlined.
And when you do pick up items, you're pressing, the touchpad on a PlayStation controller, for instance, and you see like really simple icons fade in on the bottom of the screen, just telling you that you have these quest items with you. And that's it. You're not really doing anything else. You go into computer screens and you select things, you select like emails to read, but on your person, there's very little menu-wise and UI-wise. And so it makes this game really immersive in that way. The Omni tool, I think, is a really cool, like central tool. I think it's cooler than Amnesia's lantern, I think just because of how it looks.
No contest.
Yeah, exactly. The lantern was kind of central to how that game played and like, playing with the darkness versus the lightness. But the Omni tool, it is a vehicle for letting Catherine talk to us. It is how we open doors. We sometimes need to leave it behind while we go to look for something. So I just like that it sort of evolves over time. And then the end of the story, it is a genuine gut punch. I agree about everything you said about the end. It is very impactful. I will remember that moment for a long time. It made me uncomfortable. It made me think about the story long after we finished. And it is kind of a surprising ending. It is an ending that precedes the credits. The credits start rolling and you go, oh my God, that was the end.
Yeah.
There is an epilogue, like a post-credits scene that truly wraps things up. And I also think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that's really well done. And that feels like a great moment of closure in SOMA. But the moment before that, I feel like I understand what Simon is going through just because of how he's communicating his thoughts and then just how suddenly we get the credits. I'll say that.
Yeah. And the voice performance too, just like really nails it.
Really hammers it home. So a lot that I love about SOMA. I'm going to get into things that I disliked about SOMA now. I think when it comes to the relationship between Catherine and Simon, I think I actually have dislikes where you have likes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think we differ on a few things when it comes to the story. I like these two people. I like how they talk to each other. I don't have a problem with like the voice acting. I like this idea of these two voices talking to each other for the whole time. I think that's a great way to deliver the story. But I think the answers about what's going on come too slowly. And I actually get a little frustrated with Catherine not being so forthcoming. She's this acquaintance. We seem like we should be trusting her, but she's not giving us answers. And that became really apparent in my replay. It's like she continuously doesn't tell Simon anything. And I found that frustrating. And like, I think Simon should have been maybe more frustrated with her. And I also feel like motivations of these characters can feel a little contrived. There is Simon wanting to help Catherine with her mission of finding the Ark. And I feel like he like really enthusiastically wants to help her after only just meeting her and not getting any answers from her. It feels like he does a 180-degree turn a little too suddenly in his motivations. And he like sympathizes with the robots a little too soon for me. So it just feels like he wasn't allowed to express his confusion and frustration and just how much he was lost. So I felt like his motivations felt a little expedited, and I wish he could have explored more of those initial emotions.
Can I retort slightly?
Yeah, sure.
I don't have an argument for Simon's motivations. I think maybe he's just a nice guy. I don't know, but I don't have a retort for that. But my counter to Catherine being withholding is that I think the impression that I get from Simon is that he is, and I'm going to use some real cringe language here, but like he is a non-protagonist character in a protagonist situation. So when you're talking to people who like anime, he's like, you're not a protagonist, you're a side character. I think Simon is not a protagonist, but he is pushed into this like protagonist role. And so he needs someone like Catherine to be withholding, or else he shuts down or, doesn't commit to the goal. And the goal is Catherine's, you're saving the Ark.
I feel like we could get to the idea of what the Ark is maybe a little sooner and just emphasize that more. I'm fine if he wants to help her. I'm fine if like they're on the same side, but there is a succession of like 4 or 5 moments that are like back to back, it feels like, where he's asking her questions and she just blows him off. That's kind of what I'm talking about. It's like, for me, also wanting answers as the player, it's like, that's kind of a storytelling turnoff. I have just as many questions as Simon, and I'm not getting anywhere. And we're going to like 3 of the subsections of the facility. So it's something that I didn't notice when we were playing in like the normal playthrough. I think lots of people will not have that takeaway and that complaint, to be fair. When it comes to horror, I think I have an agreement with you where the horror part of this game can kind of feel forced. There are stealth sections that can kind of slow down the momentum of the story. And it feels like we're doing this sci-fi story with Simon and Catherine, and then it's time to take a break from that for a bit because we're supposed to be scared right now. We're supposed to hide from like the WoW and the machines. And then when that's done, let's continue the sci-fi story. And I felt like there's this odd lack of acknowledgement of the scary parts. It feels like Simon and Catherine talk about getting to the Ark. The horror parts will happen throughout, but they feel separate from the story.
Yeah.
It feels like this game is like, on one hand, it is a sci-fi story. On another, it is a horror game. And those two don't magnetize together for me.
Right. And maybe that's why I think like I'd be interested in trying the game without the WoW. It's interesting that you put it in words that help me understand
when
the
you
source
were
of
saying,
the problem.
When you were saying that about the WoW, it was making me think about, oh, what if we played this whole game without all that stuff and it was just about exploring and these two people talking to each other? And then it would probably feel more like a game like Firewatch, where Firewatch is a game about two people who aren't together, but they're talking and they're trying to solve a problem, but it's not scary. So I wonder if this game would be stronger, leaning more on one side versus the other. So it feels like the horror is for the player. It feels like the sci-fi and the idea of humanity and what humanity is maybe more for the characters to talk about. And then if we glean something from that as the players, then that's great. But for me, they just didn't like always compute together. So then there are those sections like walking around in the ocean. They're largely uneventful. I agree with you on that, and I can get turned around pretty easily. They feel a little bit like filler. I think that there are too many environmental notes that give nuggets of world building that feel like optional when maybe they shouldn't be optional too.
I agree. Yeah.
Everybody's going to experience this world and this story differently. You might want to read every single note, look at every picture, read every log on every computer. There's a ton of that in this game.
So much.
If you like SOMA, and if you like exploring around and looking in every nook and cranny and digesting a story from like communications that characters in the past were giving to each other, you're going to like have a lot to chew on. But sometimes that stuff feels a little too hidden, or there's so much of it that it feels a little overwhelming to me as the player to try to understand it all. So I tend to put that stuff lower on the priority list and just play through the main story and try to just absorb the Catherine Simon story. So I think a little bit of that environmental storytelling is okay. I would prefer more of the storytelling to be direct. And then there are just a few points where the respawning feels really brutal because you have to replay large sections to get to the next checkpoint.
Gee, what part are you talking about?
I'm talking about a part with basically an elevator. I won't describe what's going on, but there's an elevator-like part later in the game. That this was a moment I was playing during the party. We took this really long descent down into a place, and we get tons of conversation. And then when I stepped out of that thing, I wasn't sure what to do. I slipped and I fell, and then it reloaded us way back at the beginning of this section. And it was seriously like 10 or 15 minutes of needing to sit there again and wait for the same elevator-like moment to happen. And so that's just unfortunate. Is it happening constantly? Absolutely not. But when it does happen, it's a lot to sit through again. But overall, SOMA explores interesting sci-fi ideas, not so much with AI like I had hoped, but more so with like identity and sense of self. It feels like a sci-fi game on one hand and a horror game on the other, but those two halves don't always mesh together cohesively for me. But I think this is nonetheless thought-provoking and immersive, and it has plenty of creepy ambiance. It's a beautiful game to look at. It has an awesome soundscape. I'm going to rate it an 8 out of 10.
That's what I guessed.
So yeah, this is a game that I actually wasn't sure if I would like. I loved Amnesia. You know, I gave that an 8.5. I think I actually kind of prefer Amnesia: The Dark Descent to SOMA just slightly, which is why I gave SOMA an 8. But do I really like both games? Yes. I think most people will prefer SOMA to Amnesia just because it is more modern. It's got, I think, a more thought-provoking story. There are lots of anecdotes we could share about the playthrough. Did you have any anecdotes from playing it at the party or seeing other people play?
Just that I remember very early on, everybody was sort of like speculating about the story in general. And we had one friend in particular. Now, keep in mind, no one had played this game. I think I was the only one that watched a playthrough of it before.
Yes.
And one of our friends was just like almost dead on about an hour in.
Yes.
And I was really impressed with that. And I think back to it and I'm like, oh yeah, he plays these kind of games. Like he loves Amnesia. He loves, I don't know if he actually actively likes Outlast or played Outlast, but he's really into those kind of games.
Sure.
When he does play other games. So to have him there and trust his instincts, I guess, is something I'm going to be doing in the future a little bit more when we play these kinds of games, because he's
very analytical when it comes to stories.
Yeah.
He's very good at looking for clues to things, and he likes trying to piece together a theory about what's going on, which isn't always my strong suit. I just like being in the moment for a story. Yeah. But yeah, I thought about including that moment as a soundbite here, but it's kind of spoilery, and it also wasn't terribly succinct. but that was our friend Grant's.
Mhm.
But I also wanted to play a moment that involves Grant in soundbite form. It is actually very early on in the game. It's the first interactable moment. Grant was the first player at the party this year. And this is when you wake up in the apartment at the start of the game, you have to find tracer fluid. And it was like a 20-minute search to find this tracer fluid. We looked in every place it wasn't before it was found. This is the moment the tracer fluid was found in our playthrough of SOMA at the party.
There it is.
Oh
my
God.
Are you?
Where's that?
This
You
is
need to
so
check
bad.
that cupboard.
I can't believe this. We looked every other place.
I'm so bad right now.
17 minutes.
This game.
There were so many other guesses that made more sense
gonna be-
than in the
I
cupboard
know,
in the kitchen.
I know. There's gonna be an asterisk at the end of this time. Like,
We time ourselves throughout the whole day to see how long the playthrough takes. And in our playthrough, 18 or so minutes of the playthrough was just looking for that damn tracer fluid.
Yeah.
But what's funny about this is when I replayed the game, I knew where Grant had found the tracer fluid. So I thought, hey, I'm going to speed run this section. I know where it is. I go to the cupboard where we had found it, and it wasn't there. The tracer fluid can spawn in multiple places.
Wow.
And for me, I found it in the computer desk drawer, and whereas Grant found it in the cupboard. So I thought that was kind of cool that there are some variables. I
Yeah.
don't know if it has to do with the game reads that you open this drawer and this cupboard and this cabinet, then it will spawn it here. Whereas if you do it in a different order, it'll spawn it here. I don't know how that works, but they went that extra step in like randomizing it.
Yeah, if it's like the Stanley Parable where if you've played it 7 times, then it's just, somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Stanley reached for the tracer fluid in the cupboard. and
Now-
it wasn't there.
I do put some medicine in the cabinet in the kitchen.
Okay.
So that's not totally like
It's not, yeah, I know. Well, we were looking in the shower.
Yeah.
We were looking in the medicine cabinet in the bathroom. We were looking
in trash
the
cans.
on the windowsill.
Yeah.
Yes.
We were too stuck in the BioShock mind space where you can find alcohol in the, under the cushions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I thought it could be anywhere. Who knows? We don't know who Simon is yet. Maybe he keeps things in strange places. Like his apartment kind of is a mess. So I could believe that it's in the fridge. You know, who knows? Just playing again in safe mode, all the encounters in stealth were reduced to like these scary visions without the threat of death. And I found it still really immersive, really effective. I was less frustrated with those sections because I wasn't constantly dying. I didn't have to like juke around enemies as much. A lot of the times, the WoW robots would just kind of be standing there being really menacing. Sometimes they wouldn't even chase me, but if they did chase me, they might like disappear and I would have the appearance that I got hurt, but I would never fall down and die and respawn. So I really like that they included that as an approachable version of the game to play. And for people who are a little intimidated by horror games or being stealthy in a place where it's really stressful and scary, play in safe mode. I think it's a really legit way to play. SOMA is also asking a very complex question. If humans were gone, but some of their everlasting experiences and memories were stored, would humanity technically exist? And it was reminding me of physical media versus digital media a little bit.
Interesting.
So I thought that was relevant for you specifically.
Yeah.
And I guess me, because I'm like almost exclusively digital media, whereas you're physical media.
You're about to make a hypocrite out of me, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I'm not building a case or anything. I'm not surprising you here. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about if a brain scan of a human is human or what humanity is after playing this game? Does this game make you think about those things differently?
I wouldn't say differently just because it's stuff that I have thought about a bunch just in my life. But what I'll say here is going to sound super deep, but I don't know, coming from me, it doesn't feel super deep. We'll assume that a brain scan is a full brain scan, emotion, everything that makes you you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big emphasis that people tend to put on this is like so much of our civilization like believes in an afterlife or something super significant like that.
Mhm.
But when you're someone like me who is an atheist, doesn't believe in anything, just like when you're gone, you're gone. And if your brain is destroyed, so are you, that
Sure.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't see the brain scan as being not you. Like there's your physical body, your life, but then there's your experience and your consciousness. And I believe that those are like separate, I guess.
Yeah.
Like if you could capture your brain, then that is pretty much your essence and everything else is flesh.
That makes sense. Like you're a vehicle for the person, the personality, the ideas, the memories, the opinions you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It also made me think of like more of a novelty, humorous question, but like if you discovered that there was another version of you like out in space or something, and it was just like all of you except your body, like just floating out there, how would you feel?
I would feel unsettled for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not going to seek it out and make sure that there's only one of us. I don't think.
Right. You're not going to like hunt it down and
Yeah.
eradicate it.
I don't
Like,
think
I'm
there's
the only one. Yeah.
As long as I'm not going to be replaced by that one, which assuming if they're the same person as me, they won't seek me out either.
But for the purposes of just archiving you, basically,
Yeah.
you might be a little more indifferent about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. But also, once you die, you won't even be able to care about it.
Yeah.
Probably.
I'll be if I know that I'm the archived version, I'll be less scared of dying. So
Yeah.
that'd be nice.
Yeah. Would you want to swap places then at that point? Like, would that give you more comfort in a odd way? This is getting really like existential and I'm kind of lost in the sauce. But, what other game makes us think about this stuff too?
Right.
There are optional choices with what to do with robots and information. When we get to certain story moments, we can choose to erase archives on Simon. We can choose to shut off robots permanently. Sometimes it's mandatory, but other times you're not really sure about whether you can unplug a robot and kill it forever. Not all robots in this game are like trying to attack you, right? So
Right.
some of them are people who have been sort of possessed by the WoW, and there are moments where there's like a mixture of biology and technology in really grotesque ways. And sometimes we can shut that stuff off and like basically mercy kill things.
Yeah.
So I wanted to play another moment. This is our last soundbite for this episode, but this is when, again, Grant was playing and there was this perception in the room. I'm not sure it ended up being the case, like truthfully, but there was this perception that unplugging a robot was optional and doing so would kill this person who was suffering. But do we want to do that? Can we plug her back in? And Grant was trying to plug her back in and he couldn't.
Oh.
Wait.
Oh,
The screen was clear.
oh, it was? Right.
Grant.
No way. No, put it back. I'll put it back. Everything's fine. We're going to put it back.
You put it on your misery.
The screen said.
What's her
The
life?
screen was clear.
What
It
life
wasn't
is that to
fuzzy
lay
anymore.
there and be pumped by robots? I mean, like that.
Yeah, and she said like it won't let me die.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes the room ask questions. People kind of take sides. It's like, would that person want to be in this state? Like maybe it's okay that we unplugged them, even if it was optional. I don't know. Any reactions to that, whether it's unplugging a robot, erasing audio files, erasing video files or data on different scientists from the facility? We get those moments from time to time. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's very clear. I'm scared of death. And in this case, death is your consciousness being erased. So in my opinion, unless someone specifically asks to die, what is the harm in leaving it on? Like I have very strong feelings about like, especially in the medical field where people make determinations based on quality of life. And I do have very strong feelings about that, especially after the pandemic and people that were essentially decided to be forgotten because of, something that someone might consider a poor quality of life, but maybe the person that was living didn't.
Yeah.
And we encountered a couple of characters that were okay with their situation and ultimately met their demise due to our actions.
There were a couple moments that chilled me, and it had to do with information. It was less about unplugging a version of someone and letting something die. It was actually the memory or the last recorded archive of an event or a person that we could just choose to eliminate. And then there's no other source of where that stuff lives. There's like the last audio files of Simon on Earth before we jump to PATHOS-II. You find that stuff and you can choose to erase it. And I did that on my solo playthrough. I don't remember if we did that at the party because I wasn't playing at that moment.
Yeah, I was out of the room, so I missed that part.
Yeah. And when it happens, there's something just really quietly tragic about it because only you know that it's being erased, but also there's like nothing, there's nobody, no one, no being that would probably ever interact with that archive. But just the fact that it exists is a good idea to me as someone who likes preserving things and like
preservation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to see the ability to delete it and then doing it because I was curious as the player, it kind of stung, you know, it was a bummer. It was a mini gut punch, not as big of a gut punch as the end of the game. But just the fact that like these last moments that we have preserved of Simon from when he was in the year 2015, those are now gone. No one can ever know what happened there.
Yeah.
Except me, the player. That was really powerful. Those are also some moments I'll remember from SOMA for a long time. Any other reactions? Any other thoughts on SOMA?
Nah, man. I highly recommend it to most people.
I do too. Especially like people who want to play something that's scary, that isn't that challenging and isn't that long. We did say at one point maybe it is a little too long for our tastes. There are times where there are stretches of walking and we don't want to do that for the longest time, but I also recommend it to horror fans who are both new to horror and who are, you know, experienced horror fans who haven't played SOMA.
Most people also aren't playing 40 indie games in a single year, so they might be a little more amenable to a longer game.
Sure. Yeah. And it's not like it is, you know, even a 10-hour game for most people. Yeah. It's like under 10 hours. But yeah, that is our review of SOMA. You can play it on PC, Mac, Linux, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. DiscoCola rated it a 9. I rated it an 8. That's the end of this episode of Underplayed. You can find more of our episodes at kzum.org/underplayed and on common podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Our music was composed by Jack Rodenberg. Our art comes from Onimochi. Underplayed is on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at UnderplayedPod. You can find me in those places at Bopo. That's BO_PO. I'm also on the GG app where you can see my game lists, such as all the games I've tried through Steam Next Fest for any given year past 2022.
And I am in all of those places to varying degrees as DiscoCola. You can also find me on Twitch, and I'm also on the GG app where I placed both of these games that I played today in my top 100 with SOMA at number 85 ahead of Momodora and Homebody at 99 ahead of Ono.
It's going to stay there a long time.
Yep. And well, maybe not. We'll see.
That was sarcastic.
You can also look for our collective Underplayed podcast channel on Twitch, twitch.tv/Underplayed podcast, where we occasionally play co-op games, and maybe perhaps we'll do something else with that channel in the future.
Next time, we'll have 2 more secret games to review, and our featured game will be one of those co-op games you can find at twitch.tv/Underplayed podcast, Operation Tango, an espionage co-op adventure developed by Clever Plays. Until then, everyone, keep on playing.